Welcome to Hello Self. It's a podcast. Hello out there, my Hello Self audience. And I'm so glad you're here today, and you will be too. You remember our purpose as the Hello Self podcast is to turn your can'ts into cans and your dreams into plans. We want to help you get those dreams and goals off that someday shelf and start living them now. So I'm Patricia Leonard, and I am your host, and I have a fabulous guest today, Carter Nelms. And you'll learn more about him as we move through the show. He'll tell you the real story, and I'll give you an introduction. And I met Carter. We were just sitting here before we started recording, talking about how we met and some of the roles that he's played. He's a fabulous actor and much more. But anyway, we met at Women in Film and Television event. And you know how sometimes you're just attracted to the energy of people. And I would say to you, all of you out there listening, if you find that true, get a little bit more about who that person is. You just never know. I met Carter and I had no idea who he was. He was interested in women in film and what's going on there. And he stepped out. And this is what you have to do. So anyway, I came home. We exchanged information. I came home and learned a little bit more about him when I went on there and said, who is this man? And I've been so impressed. I was blown away at what he has done at a young age. So you will be too. And remember, our purpose here, besides the mission, is that I believe that in everybody's story, there are lots of gifts and many glories. So I want you to pay attention to what he's saying, because he'll tell you about some Hello Self moments or things that changed his life, maybe from the time he was a little boy. Here, I'm going to give you a brief overview now, and then I'll turn it over to Carter. Carter, you want to say hello to the guests out there, and then we'll go into your interview?
Yeah, I'd love to. I'm looking forward to this, and thank you also for having me on board.
I'm excited, yes. I just like to learn more about people and then share that with the world. Okay, he's a former stage and improv amateur, a software engineer. Now, this is the diversity. We can do anything we want to. And I want you to see he's done a little bit of everything. And a Tennessee native with a drawl. Everybody appreciates that. And he's done so many things. He's got sports background. And he said he may not have been the best, but it doesn't matter. The more Hello Self moments are the more things we allow ourselves to get into and then discover who we are a little bit more. I thought this was the end of the world, and then I got in here and it was just the beginning. He's been a science teacher in film. He's been a disciple, which it was a faith-based kind of film. And his bio is just full of acting roles that he's had, television, web series he's been involved in. And I'm not going to go into each of these, but I want you to learn more about him as he shares and as you listen to the podcast and then explore who he is. Music videos. We'll find out if he sings or just acts. Theater and miscellaneous things. He was even in a healthcare kind of thing. And you can see from who he is, he takes care of himself and he's very diverse. So I'm going to point out some things as we go through this that I want you to pay attention to as Carter Nelms shares his story now. Okay, Carter, you take it from here now.
Right. Yeah, thank you for the introduction on everything. And yeah, as far as it pertains to everything on the resume there, it's largely been a really exciting, crazy last year and a half in regards to all that. So I mentioned on there being a software engineer. I also mentioned being stage improv amateur. So when I was in school, I was very heavily invested in the left brain kind of stuff, science, technology, that kind of thing. And I studied mechanical engineering when I was in college.
Wow.
Made a switch over to software a couple of years out, went to Nashville's 6-month boot camp, Nashville Software School back in 2014. And it was when I decided that was the switch I wanted to make. It seemed like such an obvious choice. It was an obvious choice. It was something I had picked up as a hobby in college and just finally had an epiphany of, why am I not doing this? This is something I love. It's very accessible. It pays well. It's flexible. It just had it all. There's not a lot of legal barriers to getting into it.
Did you hear that, audience? An epiphany. That's a hello self moment. Yay.
It was, and this was just a couple years out of college, and I distinctly remember, not just in me, but in family and friends around my same age at that time. That's a struggle to really find what you want to be doing professionally, and it feels. I think most people that go through college feel that it's a little bit upside down, and that you invest so much time and
Yes.
possibly even money in a particular path, and then you get out into the real world, and then you actually get to feel it, and you actually get to suss out, what do I really even want to do?
Great advice. Great advice. Yes.
And so I was fortunate in that I wasn't in a position that locked me in. I didn't have big debts. I had an education that gave me the flexibility to pivot. I was especially fortunate that the Nashville Software School existed at the time. It had been around for a couple of years. That was around when those boot camps were really popping up. Since then, there have been many that have come and gone. Some of them are a dime a dozen. Nashville Software School is one of the oldest and best in the country, so I will still shill for it to this day. A wonderful place. But that allowed me to step into that field in 6 months' time, when normally I've seen people when I was in college. In my engineering classes, there was one man who had a 4-year biology degree, and then he decided that wasn't for him. So he came back and got a four-year engineering degree, and phenomenal credentials. That's not going to hurt you, but that is 8 years investment, and that's a money, and that's a lot to pour in. And I knew, man, I do not want to go back to school for another 2 years, 4 years, whatever it would take. So I was blessed in that, and really at the time, going from having that epiphany to 12 months later, having found that school, attended there, connected with a local startup company towards the end of school, and begun working there. 12 months time for all that to happen it was exciting. It was hard to ignore the timing of things, including the existence of that school, the existence of the company. It had actually been founded earlier that same year that I started school, after I had that epiphany. It's a place I worked for 10 years and adored my time there. So everything in that felt divine, but there was those desires in our heart that underscored it.
Yeah, you know what? I love what Carter is saying here, and this is great advice for you. Everything you do, he's talking about technology. Everything you do in life, there are no failures. There are no wrong roads, because it's building something in you. So don't start telling yourself, I wish I would have. Just look at the value of that. And that's what Carter just brought to you right there. Great tip and great strategy advice. Okay, I'm sorry. I keep interrupting.
Oh, you're good. I'll add to that. When I did all that with the school, more than once people asked me, don't you wish you had been doing software when you were in college? And I would typically just say no, but it was more of I don't really even know how to compute that question. There's not a version of me that was ready to do that at that time. Everything happened when it was supposed to.
Oh, another great piece of advice. We will when when it's supposed to happen in our life. Oh, Carter, great advice there. Yes.
And it leads to some fun, adventurous seasons if you're willing to lean into it. And that's not to say, too, there haven't been some long, extended seasons of dullness and wishing you had some of that excitement in those times. But when those moments hit, when you recognize them, when you walk in them in peace, actually, I'm gonna come back later in this talk too, because it's going to be relevant. But I don't want to take this story out of context of Christ, but I go to the story of Peter walking on the water. When you keep your eyes on Jesus, and that's where I don't want to get out of context with it. But in those seasons like that, and you trust when there's something in your spirit that knows, not in an anxious sense of I'm striving to reach this thing, but just knows, okay, I'm on this path. A recurring theme that I see in people who are in such a situation is they go, it was easy, is a path that should have been challenging, at least as we imagine it.
Yeah.
The doors open when it is something that is meant for you. And there are still going to be times that you're tested. There are definitely going to be times that you're tested, maybe even more so than other seasons. But man, I speak as someone who has struggled with times of going, is God even paying attention to me? And then
Yes,
if
are you there, God?
yeah,
Yeah.
and the times will come he puts those to shame. And I have a respect for Joseph from the Bible, son of Jacob, Joseph, spending all that time in Egypt, years and years of his life, and then that shotgun approach to being the second most powerful man in the world. That there's nothing God can't do, and so it's really impossible for me to tell at least my story without making that point, because that is the point of the story.
Bravo. Bravo. Yes. And Carter is talking about right now, and I know it may seem a little wild, but we're going through a major shift in our society now. And in that shift, and I think it really started with COVID, it was a moment that didn't feel really good, but it caused us to say, hello, self. Who are you? What are you about? What's really important? Is death part of what we had to face a little bit of everything, income, but I think what it does is disruptions can help us move to a better place. So if everything were perfect, we might not pay attention. But in what's going on in our society, this is my belief, and Carter and I haven't even talked about it, but I'm loving what he's telling you, because it's funny how God brings people together. Stephen Covey, a corporate leader, talks about the circle of influence. And I've said this in a lot of podcasts, but it all begins with us. And then the way we live our life influences. As a matter of fact, it goes out there and influences others. That's what's happening in our society right now. There are some people making shifts or awakening, like having an epiphany or a hello self moment, and saying, you know what? This is what I want to be doing right now, or this is the way I'm being led. This is the story I want to be telling. And in doing that, we're shifting our society and world, not only our society, but our world. And I am now convinced that Carter is in here to make a big shift in our society. And I didn't know that. See, I learn as much as you all do. So I'm going to step out, but our society, we're going through this, and I think it's coming from a higher level than any of us. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
No, not at all. I'm really glad you said that. And I know I smiled just then when you said we didn't talk about this in advance, because that was my first thought when you started talking, was I wanted to note that. Because when as soon as you started making that point, I'm like, yes, that's exactly. And on my own story, I'll have some stuff to share on that too. But just a
Yes.
big picture of it, including, especially as you mentioned, the 2020 COVID era of things, I think that has done a lot of pruning and moving about and changing things about. It definitely was a major factor in allowing for the paths of my life in the most recent season. Actually, I'll go back to that actually, because that'll serve the broader point as I'd also tell the story of it all. But so as far as me with the software engineering, I knew I wanted to be in this startup environment. I wanted to be in a small place and have a spot that's affected by the things that I'm doing heavily, and where I can hit the ground running and learn as much as I can. And it was fun and it was exciting. And you get into 2020 and we were all there. It was a very strange time. I was fortunate in that our industry is a very diverse industry, so it didn't feel the impact that a lot of places did. We did work from home for a few months, and it was interesting seeing. So I think there is a certain strappiness that existed in everybody in a company like that. And there were different opinions and thoughts and that kind of thing. But we got back in the office pretty quickly. And I think most of us recognized there were some people who were mostly hurt during that time. And there were some people that seized opportunities. And when you saw them again, they'd been working out or they'd been learning a new skill or something like that. And it was a transformative time for people in a lot of ways, good or bad. And a lot of that reflected what people chose to do in that season, in that time. On our end, it was actually fun coming back into the office. There was the joy of seeing everybody again, but also there was a more of a positive spirit in it all. So it was a really good place to be. For me, I guess a couple of physical changes. One, I had been dealing with I had some issues with my shoulder and hip that had been very frustrating and that I dealt with for a long time. And I'd gone through some unsuccessful work in 2019 on those. Some of it I felt misled into. So I was at a very low point with that. And I had not been exercising like I should have. And you can see I'm not Dwayne The Rock Johnson here, but at the time I was about 15 to 20 pounds lighter, which, as you can tell, I just don't have that much to not have on me. I was thin. It showed, not in a good way. I needed some meat on me. So late 2019 was when I started working out. I've got a fraternal twin brother. He played football back in high school. He knows a thing or two about this stuff that I didn't. He's gym at his place. So we'd started working out late 2019. Come 2020, we have that extra flexibility. And so we're hitting it hard. And so in this season, and I'm so grateful to him for this, it was good physically and it got me over some hurdles mentally. He helped to push me through some stuff. And by the end of the summer, I was stronger than I'd ever been in my life, even when I was younger and in school. And that's something I've carried since then. And for anybody, when you are in better physical shape, that affects the way you carry yourself. That affects the way you think about yourself. It's not that you can't have a positive self-image without that, but it does. Same as having a good posture, sitting upright. Like those things that make you feel physically improved will reflect and come out of you mentally, socially, all these other ways. In that time too, this was just for fun, but also I think a little bit as well, because I did have some frustrations during that season. I won't go into them because most of us have a lot of the same frustrations, but there were a lot of frustrations during that season. And during that time, I was doing the whole COVID hair, letting it grow out. I had always had short hair. I always thought it'd be fun to grow it long, and thought, you know what, I'm not cutting it till we get back in the office, not knowing how long that was going to be. And we were relatively quick. And then finally, it's like, even my boss told me, why don't you go to the end of the year? And I thought, well, if I go to the end of the year, that's 10 months. I can't do 10 months and not do 12. So I got to a year, no haircut, just messed around. I was like, I like this. I like it. And the main reason I bring that up is in acting, needing some way to stand out. Everybody has something different, but a casting director, especially someone who hasn't seen you before, if you need something to stand out, there's a lot of actors that are my general demographic, my age, my race, my height, all that kind of a stuff, men. And long hair is not terribly uncommon, but it's a little more rare. And so far, it's been mostly an asset.
Nelson.
Yeah.
I love him.
Yeah. And so you do have stuff, especially for me, I do want to be doing a lot of faith-based stuff. And that unlocks roles like we were talking earlier. We can get into some more of those, but with the disciple and there have been some faith-based roles like that where the long hair is a specific asset for that kind of thing.
I think another really good point, you changed your image a little bit and that also helps change our thinking about ourselves and seeing ourselves, doesn't it? Yeah, just like the physical body. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I think a better way to put what I was trying to get into.
You said that. I got it from you.
Good, because that's what I wanted to come across. There was an element of it on the surface level, I liked it, et cetera. And this was before I was acting and all that too. But there was an element too of, in a way, none of us are the same person than we were before 2020. It affected us in some ways. It changed the ways that we thought about things and viewed things. And so there was an element as well there was that element of evolution and wanting to reflect that.
Mm-hmm. Yes. My nephew, he's very quiet. I think he's 16 now, but he's let his hair grow long. And I told his name's Moses. And I said, Moses, don't cut your hair, honey. I don't care what anybody says. And our family's a little conservative, but not to the point about how you express yourself. And he's found who he is by one way, and that is by his image. And secondly, he's very quiet. So when he says something, people listen. And then secondly, his hair is long. I just love it. Oh my gosh. And when you're telling this story, I keep thinking about Moses and where he may go with his life too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I told you I keep interrupting.
No, you're good. Yeah. I think there's just an element of all of our stories have universality to them.
Yes.
And otherwise they wouldn't be of much interest, really.
That's a very good point. Another great point. Yes. Okay, you could take it again.
All right. Going from that's where things were for a couple of years or so. Yeah. And it'd be hard to cram every single detail into it all, but I will at least getting to the point that acting really stepped up. And I'll note this was something I looked back on after the fact and realized, there were some things that God had made, certain connections and things like that before the switch flipped that I didn't realize that's what they were, because I didn't know that switch even existed. God was working on something that was going to happen, and positioned some things for that I didn't realize that's what they were for. And I realized after the fact, that's what that was for. But the switch flip, if you will, started early last year. I had actually just hopped back onto online dating for the first time, and I had been in a relationship in 2022 and come off of that, and I thought, okay, I'm going to go back out there. And I matched with a young woman who turned out she and her two siblings had been in acting in Hollywood really for a long time. She was more behind the camera. Her brother and sister were more in front, and they had done a lot of cool stuff. It was really awesome to see. She herself was working at the time for a local agency that did casting it was Bonfire Legend that did casting for the Daily Wire. So, and I won't share like too much of that kind of stuff there, but it was really interesting hearing about the process and learning about how this worked from that side of things. And I'm someone who, again, I'd been a software engineer. I'm sorry, I'm making sure I haven't skipped any details on that because I had limited acting experience. I mentioned having done stage. That was back when I was younger, did a little bit in school. Yes. It wasn't something I'd pursued professionally. I'd never done film or screen, so I had no exposure to self-tapes. I didn't know that was a standard. Learned since then. That's one of those, and we'll talk about COVID era setting things up for me. That was one of those things that, living here in Middle Tennessee, that was one of those things that created a certain accessibility post 2020 that was required for me in this journey. Because it wasn't just, when I say, again, the switch flip, it wasn't all of a sudden I'm dropping everything and going to do this. It's been an ongoing. But anyway, in all of this, we dated for a couple months or so. And I finally said, this looks like a lot of fun. I'd like to try this. So she found a scene, or it was a couple scenes for me, it was the same character, two different scenes, and said, let's just shoot a self-tape as if this were an audition. Let's just shoot a tape and see what you got. And so I had about a week or so to memorize the lines, decide how I was going to do it, and just took a stab at it. And again, going into some providential stuff. So I lived 5 minutes from work. She worked right across the street at the time. And so we took a lunch break one day, hopped over to my apartment, set up, shot this tape. And from that, you can tell when somebody's just being nice or when they're being honest. And she had this light in her face at the end of it. Oh my gosh, Carter, you can do this. Or her saying, like, I don't know what I would have said if that were not good, but thankfully that was really good. It just was talking me up, and I was like, we got to get you some headshots and set you up. And it's a silly little moment like that, or that kind of seed. We didn't date for much longer after that. And so I was on my own with it. And I'm the kind of guy that if I am thinking about, say, making a large purchase, I won't make it. And then if 2 to 4 weeks later, it's still on my mind, then I'll be like, okay, that is something I want. That's not just a passing fancy of it all. Yeah. So About a month after that was when I finally decided I'm going to start putting stuff out there. Now, during that month as well, I was in my 9th year working at the time. We were redoing our website. We needed some new professional headshots. So we had some people come in the office, do some professional headshots, something we've never done ever
Oh,
since I've been there. Yeah. So they sent us the photos. They had retouched one for each person, but they sent us the outtakes. And we're told, hey, if you want a different one, just let us know. We'll send it back to them and we'll get it touched up instead. I picked a different one that I definitely preferred to the one they chose. A few days later, my boss's assistant came up to me and said, hey, Carter, I'm so sorry. Boss had to move quickly to get the website ready. So he just used the original photo. That said, they did go on and fix up the one you picked, and it's paid for. So if you want it, you can just have it. And so again, that's just one little thing, and amongst a sea of little things that just lined up. And so I'm just listening to this and going, okay, all right, I've got this free, professional, up-to-date headshot. It wasn't an acting headshot, but that's okay. It's a good shot. And so I hopped on Backstage and Actors Access and bought my subscriptions and shot a couple at-home monologues just to have something to put out there since I had no footage at this point. And just in popping things out there, got enough interest and a couple responses that I wasn't necessarily expecting, even whether they led to a job or not. But it was clearly like, oh, okay, like people are responding to this. And I didn't have much out there yet. So I was like, oh, cool. And just enough to feed that little bit of fire. So I was looking up classes and looking up ways to get my foot in the door, found out about the 48-hour film project, got connected with that, with a really cool team, with someone who's still a mentor to me to this day. And right after that, it was student film season. And so I was like, okay, good. This is a good chance to hopefully get some footage. And I put out to several and wound up every weekend. So from the 48, which was the last weekend in August, until the first weekend in October, I worked every single weekend on something, except for one weekend, which was a weekend before I was moving. And the weekend after that, I worked on 2 films on the same weekend. So it averaged out to still one every weekend. And it was just
put them out there for people to see.
Yeah, a lot of those are on my link tree. That was
Yeah.
that was one of those things at the bottom of my email, one of those links available.
And ladies and gentlemen, we will give you the links to those so you can go see his how he's moved through his career. Yeah.
Yeah. And I've had a lot of stuff come up since then, and I keep it updated whenever new things come out, just to have a good collection of some of the works, as well as reel and resume, that sort of thing. But yeah, it was a wild season. It was very affirming. It was one of those things that was, like I mentioned earlier, when there's a path that's easy and you could look at it and go, oh, it's student films, but it went beyond that. And you had stuff like that job in October, the one that was early October, that's led to one of the bigger things that probably the biggest thing that I'm working on right now. And it's not something I can talk about too much, but it was an incredible door for a faith-based TV show that we'll be working on here soon. We did a little bit earlier this year and had some amazing doors open for it. And as those doors opened, there were some delays that came as just part of the game.
Yes.
But it was just a path. It was a path that I could not have planned and a path that I could not have timed. And alongside all of this, and this is definitely something I won't go into too much detail on, but there were some signs already at work that some doors were closing there. That was not what I wanted to hear. I had at this point 9 years there, and I loved the people there.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, to jump forwards a little bit, things grew in this last year. There were some new big cool opportunities. I at this point had gotten some headshots and gotten my reel and all that kind of stuff together, and I've done some newer different kinds of projects, including, you mentioned, the music videos and things like that. I would like to learn. I wouldn't trust myself with a musical, but I think with a little bit of a nudge, I could be very passable.
Yeah. You keep discovering more things about yourself. And that is what life is about, is taking all of these steps and getting up there and say, I'm curious about that. I'm curious. I don't know if I could sing, or maybe a little, but yeah.
Yeah.
That's where it begins. And you've been saying some things, and it's very unusual, but I've been listening. I love your story. But you talked about relationships. The young lady that he met through a dating app, we don't know sometimes why we're attracted to people or to situations. And it wasn't about the dating. That's what he thought. But God had a different plan. And the relationship was for his career. Now, that's not what he went into it for, perhaps, but at least she helped open some doors. And that's exactly, people are put in our path. And he's telling you this, people are put in our path to sometimes encourage us or show us how to take the next step. I love another thing, and I think this is very important for my audience too, all of you who are listening. New beginnings. There's a new beginning always close some doors. So there's an ending somehow. And Carter was telling you that as he moved forward with his career, his business closed. And it was like he was a little disappointed, but that's the way it was supposed to be. So I think we have to look at sometimes beyond the moment. We live in the future and the past all the time. That's the problem with all of us. And one thing we need to begin to do is to start learning about living in the present and watching what's happening. And that's what Carter's been telling you, is stay aware of what's happening with you and the people around you and what's going on. Okay, those are some points I wanted to bring out, Carter. And I did want to ask you something else. He brought all those, I'm just highlighting it. What are some of the favorite parts that you have played in your acting career or in any part of your life?
So in broad picture of I love diversity. I like being able to play characters who are strong and confident, and then being able to turn around and play characters who are weak and shaky in themselves. And I like characters who are kind-hearted, and I like characters who are mean-spirited. And
Yes.
yeah, I want a wide breadth. I've been fortunate in that people's first impressions of me, so especially when you're in casting and being looked at, people are going to think, okay, here's what I see in you. And there's been not a lot of consistency in it in the best way. Some people will think, oh, this is what I see, and others will be a totally different thing. I do have a lot of confidence in myself to be able to embody a wide range, and I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to display that. So with that, I've had one thing I didn't necessarily expect is I had a number of police detective roles come in, detective specifically, and that's something I've had a lot of fun with. And then on the other side, I just had a movie come out where I play, it's actually a detective movie, but I am the husband of a murder victim. And he's this grungy, stuck in his relationship, a guy. And so a very different kind of a type. And it was fun to get into. And it's just very different. I've played that kind of character before, but I've played the put together. You mentioned earlier before we started here, we had a chance to talk, and you mentioned there's a role where I'm playing this dad to a little girl, and it could almost be like a Leave It to Beaver kind of a real person, but he is there like seeing his daughter where she is and trying to educate her, trying to teach her on the level that she understands. And very broad answer to the question, I suppose. It's hard for me
but diversity. And I think, I like that a lot. We typically get started in something in life in general, and we keep following that path. Sometimes it might be fun to say, I didn't know that road was there. I think I'll maybe turn left instead of right today. And so I think a lot of times that we keep traveling the same old roads, and maybe there's more that we haven't seen in life. And so I like the fact that because you're talking to somebody that is diverse too. I try this, I try that, I do this, I do that. People say, when are you going to finish that? No, I never. It's the way my life is. Okay, I love that because you have favorite parts. However, you like the diversity of experiencing all kinds.
Yeah. And I think as you talk there too, like that That's a principle that's always been true for me. Like even as a kid, I was the one that was willing to try new food, and kids may not
Me
necessarily do
too.
that. Even if I knew I might not like it, I wanted to know, but what is it? What if I do end up liking it? And so my favorite thing, if I have a role come my way, is my favorite thing is if it's a character type that I haven't had the chance to do before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Discovering new parts of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's the path of life. I wrote that book called Wearing High Heels in a Flip-Flop World, and it's not about high heels. It's about getting out of our flip-flop life and stepping up to a higher understanding or a higher heel of who you are, but with attitude. I know more about who I am now. And so we just don't get stuck in life in the same things over and over. We get to experience a lot of things. Okay, is there one thing that you would like to tell our audience about that you maybe have experienced about living life and turning their can'ts into cans and their dreams into plans? Is there one thing that you'd like to tell them?
I'm going to have to go back to God on this one because a big thing for me, this has been big all the way through it. One reason I needed some affirmations when I started was not because affirmations always feel good, but it wasn't because of that. It's because I was someone who had nearly at the time, nearly a decade invested in a software engineering career at the same place. And so to take steps that threatened to uproot that for something like an acting career, on paper, most people are going to say, no, don't do that. I've been blessed with wise family, friends and family who are not just, yeah, that sounds cool and they want to live vicariously, but that see me and that have been very encouraging and that see that this is a path that I'm supposed to be on. With that, I have got to yield it at every step to God's will. And for me, that has proven to be, he's nudged things in the right direction and he's opened doors for it. I have made the mistake in life before of trying to seize and take hold of something and fooled myself even into thinking, oh, God wants me to do this, when deep in my heart, I knew, no, I want this and I want this for myself. God's end game is not just, oh, to fulfill us. Like we're not the greatest thing here in the universe, but these desires are from God. And so it's been a different approach. It's been sitting back and yielding. I feel like I've had times I felt like he's booted me forwards a little bit on some stuff where I was sitting back and going, yeah, let me make sure. But there has been a sense in my spirit that this is God's path for me. Through all of it, though, there has always been a check of, is this what you want? Because remember, even God promised Abraham Isaac, who wasn't just a son, this was the child of promise. And it's a quarter century later before Isaac comes, when Abraham was already past the point of having kids when he got the promise. And then it's not till Isaac is in his 30s, so 50 years after he's too old to get kids and has this promise, when God says, I want you to take Isaac up the mountain and sacrifice him. And I've told somebody, I'm afraid sometimes of making points like these because I've made points before and then God tests me on them. And that is a scary test. But Abraham understood faith in Yahweh, in God, was so strong that he understood. He had enough trust in God that he was willing to take his own son and submit his own son to what God asked him to do. And that has just got to be the focus of everything being done. I remember this image that I had back in Sunday school when I was a kid, and I thought it was cool at the time, but it's actually stuck with me as an adult. But it had this glass jar, like a honey pot mason jar, and it had, if I remember, there were a few golf balls, some marbles, and some sand. And the golf balls represented God and investing in God, giving to God. The marbles it represented family, some of those bigger things. And then the sand was stuff that was still important that you cared about, but wasn't necessarily like a necessity, different like these others. And so the teacher had the same amount of, or the teacher took this sand and poured it into the jar and it fills it up to a certain point. Then she took the marbles and then she took the golf balls and it overflowed. There wasn't enough room. Yeah. Then she took it all out and she did it again. She put the golf balls in first and then she took the marbles and it all fell into place. And then she took the sand and it filled up all the gaps and it filled the jar up perfectly. There's that verse, I'm the worst with citations, but I know the verse is seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you as well. Now, there's more context with all that, but there is an overarching point that I go back again to whether it's Abraham with his son or the woman who put her 2 coins into donated those in front of Jesus and may have no idea to this day that she's been immortalized in scripture. But
Oh,
that struggle even to find the words with it, but keep that the main thing.
mhm.
And all these things will be added to you as well. Don't worry about timing. Don't worry about how. Don't worry about degree. Understand that God may even understand the desires of your heart better than you do, because I can definitely speak for myself. This whole journey was not something I was professionally considering. I had awareness of my creative side. There was some classes in high school that were always like, man, I wish I had leaned into that more. I had done a little improv a few years ago that was a totally unrelated thing, had nothing to do with acting, but something I did on the side and was like, oh, yeah, this is fun. And I've got something in there. And the time had not come yet. And without those pushes, I never would have taken that leap. And I firmly believe that this has been something God has directed. And it has been. There have been years of frustration and not knowing where to go, what to do. Should I stay? Should I go as far as my season in life? And there have been times when the call has simply been rest. And it's not always what we want to do. Sometimes that anxiety gets the best of us. And like I said, I've made that mistake giving into anxiety. So all that to say, the answer to the question is don't live in anxiety, live in faith, live in trust. Understand that as you do that as well, there will be tests.
Yeah.
They're beautiful, they're hard, but they're beautiful and they're good. And there is something on the other side of all of those things. But walk in faith and don't worry about the questions.
Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, now I know why I fell in love with you when I met you. Is you're very deep as a human being and learning, but not because I remember I was talking to, I know we have to wrap this up, but I love my time with you and I know the listeners do too. My brother was talking to me one time about a situation that he faced. And he said, Sis, I don't understand it. Could you help me figure it out? And it was, we walk. And here's what I told him. I said, Rick, we walk in two worlds on this planet. We walk in the human world and we walk in the spiritual world. And so we get torn. The ego in us wants to say, I know the best. And that comes from our mind. But what Carter just explained to you is about spirit. Spirit, really, or the soul. You feel it in your soul. You feel it. You know it. And so we get torn between those because our society tends to bless the human side. Like we know everything. Power is important to us. I know in corporate America, we put all these mission statements together and then we live life the way we choose to live life. So that's ego saying, I did it. I did it. I put it out there. No, it's walking on faith. Oh my gosh. I'm telling you, I learned so much today and I am so grateful that you shared honestly from who you are, because these are the things that the world needs. And these are the things of Hello Self. This is exactly the kind of thing. And so I'm even more impressed with you as a human being and as a spiritual soul. And I'm so grateful. So is there anything else you need to say before we wrap it up? I'm going to give us a kick out the door now.
I think I'll just point back again. I mentioned the story of Peter on the water, and I said there was some later stuff where that came to, and there have actually been a moment for me since we met, actually,
Yes.
where I had something happen. It wasn't that bad of a thing, but it was
Oh.
just enough to tap into my doubts, even some doubts that I didn't necessarily know were there. And I had about a day or two of anxiety, probably the most around all of this that I have had on the entire journey. And it wasn't, I've had some moments. It wasn't the biggest moment, but it was a threat. It was enough to go, oh, wait a minute. Oh boy. And I had that story come to mind of Peter on the water. And the moment that he started to sink, it's because he took his eyes off of Jesus and he started looking at the storm and he became afraid. And that's when he started to sink. And the moment he's picked up out of the water is when he calls out to Jesus and he lifts him back up. A few days in the same week that the event happened, that kind of made me a little bit like, ooh, a little anxious. And then that image came to mind. A few days later, I had breakfast with someone who actually, he probably wouldn't care if I said his name or not, but I had breakfast with somebody who, in conversation, I don't remember what led up to it, and I wasn't talking about the stuff I just shared right there. And on his own, in what he was saying, he came to that same story, and he starts referring to talking about Peter on the water. And this wasn't a religious conversation. It was present, but it wasn't what the conversation was about. It was part of to serve the point he was making. And as he's telling that story, he's saying there's a particular point he wanted to make in the story. And the particular point he wanted to make was that it's the moment that Peter takes his eyes off of Jesus and looks at the storm and becomes afraid that he starts to sink.
Yes.
And for me, that was affirmation as well, that, okay, that is what God is trying to say to me.
Keep your
So
yeah.
And so that is, before we wrap, that's what I wanted to share, because that's for everybody.
Keep your eyes. There is a divine plan, and keep your eyes on God, and He will show you that plan little by little, and you'll go through doubts and you'll go through times that you don't understand. But oh my God, I don't even want to hang up, but we've got to hang up. But I'm telling you that these are the things that I need to hear too, over and over. And I am so grateful for my guests. So many of them surprise me and they go down this road. I don't know why God's bringing us all together. I have an idea, but it's coming from my ego self. No, it's not. It's coming from, I see a major transition coming out in the world.
And I'll add too, so many people I have heard saying that same thing. And that was an inner thought of mine as well, before I started hearing other people say it. So I firmly believe that's true.
Oh, yes. And I know, and the younger society is the areas that I'm really finding. I know we give them a rough time, but the younger society, I don't know, for some reason I relate to them. And they're waking up. Just look at Carter. I go to Planet Fitness and these young, mostly guys, and I don't know why it is. Maybe we had this women's movement and now it's time. I don't know, but it's guys and they've got this spiritual outlook in their life. And I say, where did you come from? Oh, Minnesota or California. It's not a certain area. We used to think it was only Tennessee and Indiana. I'm from Indiana. But it isn't. It's sprinkled all over, and it's sprinkled in these young people that God has brought to the planet in the last 20, 30, 40 years. And I am so grateful. First of all, I'm so grateful to have you and to know you. He knew better when I came up to you than I even knew. Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, okay, I know we got to wrap it up because you all got a day you're going to plan too. And so does Carter, and so do I. However, thank you. And thank you for being honest in who you are and the path you're walking, because that's what we need. That's what we need in the world. So thank you so much for being here. Now, we will send out, and Carter and I have already talked about this. When we send out this podcast, we will have connections for you to get to know him at another level. If you have some professional ideas, Or maybe if you've got something you want to talk to him about in life, because I'm sure he would take 5 minutes and help you out. So here we go. We're going to be signing off, and thank you all, to every one of you, Carter and all of you listening, to being here at the Hello Self podcast today. And I'm hoping, I know, I don't have to hope, I know that you've gotten some tips and strategies, and maybe even had some heartwarming moments from Carter's story that says, oh my gosh, that's my story. Because we are more alike than we are different. And I don't think society always tells us that. So we don't have to. God tells us. So anyway, thank you all for being here. And as we begin to sign off today, remember, I always say to you, keep dreaming. This is Patricia Leonard, your host of Hello Self Podcast. Have a fabulous day. Thank you for joining Hello Self today, and may it offer insights and inspire you to stay on your runway to success. Like, share, and subscribe. And remember this, keep dreaming.